Now, I am a huge advocate for using low-carb diets to reverse insulin resistance. However, if you don't want to cut carbs out entirely, there are some that are better than others that won't spike your blood sugar and therefore can be a part of your journey to reverse insulin resistance. Starting off with number 4, leftover potatoes. When we cook and cool foods that are rich in starch, some of that starch turns into resistant starch. And resistant starch is kind of like fiber in the sense that it goes through our systems undigested. So basically, by eating leftover potatoes as opposed to freshly cooked ones, the carb count is technically lower. The spike in blood sugar after eating them is going to be more gradual and less insulin will be needed all at once. On one study where men who are insulin resistant swapped some of the starch in their diet for resistant starch, after 4 weeks, they saw significant improvements to their insulin resistance. Now, I will say that you don't have to go out of your way to try to add resistant starch into your diet, but eating it as a replacement to regular starch can make a difference. And it really is as simple as cooking your potatoes and leaving them in the fridge overnight. And yes, you can reheat them afterwards. The resistant starch will still remain. Now, I will say that some people are a bit skeptical about resistant starch, and to that I say, test it for yourself, use a blood glucose monitor or a CGM. But there is a lot of clinical evidence supporting the fact that it lowers blood sugar spikes. Of course, the longer you allow the starch to cool, the more resistant starch that will form, so take that into account as well. Moving on to number 3, we have whole fruit. And this is as an alternative to fruit juice or fruit smoothies. It is always better to eat your fruit whole. And this is for a couple different reasons. The first one being that fruit is mainly made up of carbohydrates and a decent amount of sugar, depending on the fruit. When we eat fruit whole, we're eating that sugar with fiber, which slows down how rapidly the sugar is digested. However, when we drink juice or smoothies, most of the fiber has been removed or destroyed. This means that it enters the bloodstream rapidly, causing a big spike in blood sugar and a consequential spike in insulin. Number 2, overnight oats. Now, I get asked about oats and oatmeal a lot. And in general, I will say that it's not a great food choice. It's not a great breakfast option for insulin resistance. On their own, oats cause a big spike in blood sugar and they require a lot of insulin to process. And this effect is magnified if you add honey, milk, or fruit. And this goes for both steel-cut oats and quick oats. And it's even worse if you consume it first thing in the morning because when you eat carbohydrates on an empty stomach, they're digested more rapidly and the spike is more significant. But I mention them here today because there is a way to make them more blood sugar and insulin friendly. And this comes back to resistant starch. If you cook and cool them and use them for overnight oats, again, some of that starch turns into resistant starch. But I want to emphasize that you do have to cook them first. Now, another hack for oatmeal, if you will, is to add protein and fat to it. So if you have it with a couple eggs, maybe some Greek yogurt or some protein powder, anything like this is going to help to reduce the blood sugar spike as well. And this is why I think that having protein at every meal, at least 30 grams, is so important, especially when it comes to blood sugar control and insulin resistance. Protein slows the digestion of carbohydrates, so spikes in blood sugar after you eat protein and carbs together are more gradual. And I know that we're focusing on carbohydrates in today's video, but I wanted to give a quick shout out to protein and to today's sponsor, ButcherCrowd. ButcherCrowd is a meat delivery service that brings Australian grass-fed and finished beef and lamb, pasture-raised chicken and pork, and wild-caught seafood straight to your door. They work with Australian farmers and deliver Australia-wide. They have several boxes to choose from and also the option to customize your own. And with the ability to pause, cancel, or change your subscription at any time, there's no reason not to give them a try. To check them out, you can head to healthcoachkait.com/butchercrowd. I'll put that link in the description box down below. And make sure to use code KATE15 at checkout to save 15% off your first box. And finally, number 1 is dessert. And this one might catch some of you off guard. But if you are going to have something sweet, it's better to have it after a meal versus a standalone snack. And this comes back to consuming carbohydrates on an empty stomach, which we spoke about earlier. If you have something sweet after a meal, the protein, fat, and fiber from that meal is going to help to slow down the blood sugar response. Again, this is not to say that dessert is healthy or good for insulin resistance, but having something that is slightly higher in sugar and carbs after a meal that has adequate protein and fat is going to be a better option than having it on its own in between meals. And before we wrap up, I just have one final thing to say. And that is that what matters is what you do the majority of the time and not the minority of the time. If you have a few more carbohydrates one day, that's not going to derail you. If you have a cheat meal once a week, every so often, again, not going to derail you. The end goal of getting healthy for most people is to enjoy their life more. And if you're having to worry about whether or not you can have one slice of cake at a friend's birthday party, then you're missing the bigger picture. Make as many good choices as you can, as often as you can, but you don't have to be perfect. Now, I want to hear from you guys in the comments down below. Let me know how many carbs you aim to eat in a day. Do you have an upper limit? Does it change day to day? I want to hear from you. And before you go, also remember to check out Butcher Crowd. That link will be down below.